Hi there, and welcome to One Idea Away, not just a podcast, but a community and ongoing conversation meant to inspire and empower individuals to live more fully, deeply, and consciously. Let's jump into today's episode right now. Hey there, everyone. As you've come to know on One Idea Away, through these conversations, you've heard about the importance of community as it's come up in many different ways. But usually, it's kind of as an add-on or just part of our usual conversations. It's not the true focus. And so today I did want to shift and actually make that the primary focus of our conversation, because I believe you're going to hear a lot more about just how much being in community is going to play a role in where we go as individuals as well as society. You see, on One Idea Away, we do spend a lot of time talking about our individual paths, how we can become more conscious of who we are and how we can be more intentional about navigating our lives and careers and various other areas of our lives that we want to improve as we bring them more attention and mindfulness. And this is great for our individual transformation. And yet, you also hear, as those little add-ons or asides get dropped into the conversation, you hear that a lot of our guests also talk about the importance of key social circles and influencers on them. Whether their communities big or small, they have all played a key role in their journeys. And you've also heard that a lot of our guests, and I have a feeling pretty much like you as I would imagine, want to see change not only within themselves, but also contribute to changing your corners of the world. Now, some of us may have those really big ideas and visions for how we want to go out and change the whole world, and that's fantastic. And others of us may want to focus that change or that growth on our families, our close relationships, maybe our local school or a cause that we have in town. Well, whatever your corner of the world is, whatever your focus happens to be, I hope this conversation really expands your view on what's possible. And so to get into this conversation today, I went out, as always, and found the person who literally wrote the book on communities. Peter Block is a partner at Designed Learning. It's a training company that offers workshops designed to build the skills outlined in his books. He's the author of Flawless Consulting, Stewardship, The Answer to How is Yes, and Community. Peter is part of the Economics of Compassion Initiative of Greater Cincinnati and is a member of his local neighborhood council. He serves on the boards of Elementz, an urban arts center, and Live Person, a provider of online engagement solutions. His work is in the restoration of the common good and creating a world that reclaims our humanity from the onslaught of modernism. You can learn more at restore-commons.com to see more about his work. With that, Peter, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on One Idea Away.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You know, I guess maybe the place that I wanted to start today was just a little bit of your view of sort of the current state of affairs when it comes to the role of community in our lives, because it seems like this comes up in so many different ways that we're detached from some of the things that used to bring us into community, whether it be the local town center, whether it be spiritual institutions, religious institutions. It seems there's a disconnect. And I'm curious for your sense of kind of what is the state of affairs of where we stand in terms of the role that community plays within our lives.
It's an individualistic culture, and it's individualistic even in its spirituality, even in its healing. And so we all have the notion, God is changed from the inside out. And so really we've kind of abandoned the idea of community as something that's productive, and so my notion is that the community, our connectedness to others in service of making this place better, whatever this place is, has a job to do. It has a function to do that we've abandoned and we've outsourced. So now as a family, as a person, I think I can purchase everything I need. Raise my children, come on, school. Teach them about everything, sex, drugs, everything. Make me safe. Come on, police, keep me safe. Doctors, I go to my physician. I say, better living through chemistry, Dottie. What do you got in mind for me? And so in this outsourcing consumer world, community is seen as a moment of nostalgia or as something peripheral, a nice to, and then we've diluted it. By every time we're on a call with four other people, we call it a community. Well, it's communal, it's connectedness, but we still remain deeply isolated, even though in our isolation we may be getting closer to God or getting closer to ourselves or having the career I wanted or the family I wanted. And so personal development to me, it has a dark side, which is it ignores the fact that my development is totally dependent on the place that I live and the people around me, which I would call community.
Well, and I was hoping you could actually even just expand a little bit more on that so then what do you see as community and what do you really mean? Because I know it was a community, a sense of belonging. So what do you mean by community and what is that sense of belonging that you're looking to reintroduce?
It's a place and people that I have affection for or need. In the physical sense, it's the people that are in walking distance of wherever I reside. You know, most of us, especially in urban centers, are not very connected to our neighborhoods.
Yeah. But
community is a walking distance experience that I need, and belonging means that I feel that I can be myself there, that I have something to do there, that I need this. It's not a meetup. It's not a technologically produced gathering, which is fine. Mm-hmm. You know, it's fine, but it's a poor substitute for the experience of interdependence in daily things.
So I'm curious, because I obviously I want to dive into the heart of some of this work, and yet at the same time, I'm just curious, what was it that prompted kind of the passion and the attention that you've given to communities in your work and even within your life? Because I know that you're very giving also of your time with several community organizations and things like that. What sort of led you to this path?
Well, I'm trying to make sense of why certain problems are untractable. You know, if I look at the things that concern us, call it poverty, call it violence, call it the ideological things, all these things are symptoms I begin to see as the breakdown of community. And it's our lack of connectedness that's leading to these things being unsolvable. Our divides, the divisiveness, the wage, all are symptoms of a lack of connectedness and a storyline, a narrative that is organized around scarcity and blame, and it's their fault. And so the whole public narrative, you know, epitomized by what's on television, kind of puts us at odds with each other, and I think falsely so. You know, fear is being marketed even though safety is better than it ever was. And so I just thought, well, so what my little way into this is to say, well, we need a different narrative, a narrative of connectedness, a narrative of affection, a narrative of interdependence. And so that's really why I wrote the book, was to say, if you ask certain questions, if you get people together and ask them certain questions about what's your part in having created the world you're complaining about? What's the possibility you want to see? What's the dissent you have? What's the commitment you're willing to make? It gets us out of the trap that I think keeps the big issues from getting solved, whether it's nationally or what's going on down the street or what's going on with your boss. And, you know, I made a living for years inside companies because departments love to argue with each other.
Yeah.
And I made a living for years, if anybody's doing coaching and stuff, asking one question, which is, do you want to be right or do you want to work something out?
Yeah.
And if you want to be right, hire a lawyer. If you want to work something out, then we need to talk about what we want to create together, really.
Yeah. I think there's many interesting things that you just brought up, and I think I just want to use this one maybe to talk a little bit about where we are right now and what we're shifting from. I think it's a really interesting observation that fear is something that is essentially being marketed because it fits the storyline, it fits the division that we're looking for, and yet there's so much information that's contrary. That we're safer, as you said, than ever before. And I was wondering if you could talk into that. I know it's a kind of a little bit down the road in terms of thoughts I wanted to connect to, but I happen to know that this also ties to this idea of projections that you also talk about, because there's just this disconnect between what we think we see and what actually is. And I was wondering if you could speak into that for a little bit.
Well, my favorite line of all time came a long time ago was a sentence, in Russia, even the past is unpredictable. And you say, what do you mean by that? I mean that my story about how I got here, who I am, where I came from, anything that I think explains me is a social construction, which is a fancy term for I made it up. You know, life happens to us, and then we need to create meaning for it. What does it mean? Why does it matter? And so we think we're saying what's true, but it's not. It's just a projection. A projection is to put onto the world something unresolved inside myself. And so if I have uncooked seeds, that there's things I'm working on, then I'll see it and blame other people for it, so I don't have to deal with it. So most of our projection, most of our fear of the immigrant, our fear of the stranger, all the divisive stuff we see, most of the stuff inside companies about those people, and all that are kind of things we construct to organize the world, which means I can change those anytime I want. Anytime I want to change the story. But what makes sense to me, I can do it in an instant. You know, how long does it take to quit smoking? 20 years in 1 second. And so really the work is to say, well, what I'm told is true, the received wisdom, the dominant narrative of this culture, which is a free market consumer culture, was made up. And we think it's true, but it's not true. People are not anymore. There's enough for everybody. We're not basically competitive beings. Progress is not measured by scale or speed or efficiency. And so we're living and being buffeted by all these things, none of which are real. They're just buffeters.
How do we begin to recognize projection? Because obviously part of what we do when we start to see the story that we've constructed within our heads, we believe that to be our reality, right? We believe in the system that we see in front of us. So how do we begin to recognize that it's just a construct, that it's just one way of seeing things?
I ask people, tell me your story, and they do. And I say, how's it going? Whoops. How's it working for you? Have you ever, I ask them, how long have you been working on this? Oh, for years. How's that going?
Yeah.
And so the question of how's it going, what's it producing for you? Are you getting everything, and how long you've been telling the same story are all ways of confronting people with the fragility or the variability of this thing called a narrative or a story. And, everybody wants to hear everybody's story. And my feeling is, yeah, once.
Yeah.
But the second time you hear the story, it's a routine. It's not a story. It's not who you are. And so I think part of what you do with your work with mindfulness and coaching, anything, is help people reconstruct a story for themselves that's current and works for them, takes them somewhere.
Yeah. And I think it was something I know that even jumped out at me. I'd heard this, but from very, very different, in very different context than you presented in the book. But as you were talking about these projections and the way in which we put this out to society, I know that you brought up the some of the data from the 1990s, how we were actually reducing crime at just extraordinary levels in the majority of our cities, and yet there was the perception that there was a more dangerous society, even though the data was completely opposite. And
right.
It's interesting to me that what, part of that construct and part of what we're doing and part of what you're encouraging is to bring awareness of, look for what's contrary, look for what maybe contradicts your story. What is it that you're maybe not seeing? What is it that other people are seeing that you might not be seeing? And just being open to hold that space, right? The possibility of there's more information, there's more perception, there's more ways of seeing things than I might be seeing right now, and to create a space to actually have that conversation.
And I need a stranger to do that. I can't do it on my own. I need a stranger, someone not known to me, so I can be surprised. And I have to be aware that the dominant narrative is being thrown at me 3,000 times a day. Every ad, every newscast. People make a living off of my fear. There's huge industries that are counting on me being afraid, and me not having enough, and me being alone. And if you just watch the advertising and watch the evening news, you can tell that they're marketing a version of the world that makes me a more enthusiastic customer of the news and a customer of stuff and surveillance systems if I'm afraid. And chemicals, my demographic, all I see are ads for life-saving chemicals.
Right.
And we got this small addiction problem. And so I need you. I need a stranger, somebody I'm not used to being with, to sit and talk about what you see going on in this world, so I can be surprised once in a while instead of affirm. Like-mindedness is the enemy of democracy and community.
It's interesting because the way that you even pose that, and I guess I'm kind of calling this out for everybody, is that at times when you see that fear marketed, when you see it focus on our problems, our stresses, the things that are making us unhappy, the pain that's out there and everything else, what usually is then comes next is the proposed solution of what you're going to pay for that gives you the illusion of certainty, right? It's the illusion of safety.
It is a pure illusion. And the products are illusion of sexuality, illusion of power, illusion of happiness. Yeah. And you have to realize there's an agenda behind what you're seeing. And then you start getting curious about what might that agenda be. And the whole conservatism of the culture, is really an agenda for a long time that's now found an audience. It's found a listening. And the more afraid I am, the easier I am to control.
Yeah. And I think this is where, this to me again, you introduced this very early in the book, but to me it was a very, very clear pivot point of the nature of this work and what you're diving into and what you're finding was this notion of shifting from being a problem solving culture to being possibility focused. And I think that was all of a sudden it just kind of opens up this very, very different dialogue. But maybe you could talk a little bit about, because we're alluding to some of the symptoms of that problem solving culture. But if you could talk about it maybe a little more explicitly so people can understand kind of how we're oriented and how this idea of possibility focus quite literally opens up a whole new possibility for us.
The question is whether you want to see a future distinct from the past. That's the qualifying question. That's over the door. If you don't want to walk in that door, then ignore what's to follow, okay? And in the book, I say, if you don't want to create a future distinct from the past, get your money back. But if you have some longing to see a future distinct from the past, you can't problem solve your way there because you'll do just what you've been doing, just a little more effectively. When I gather with people, I never ask them their expectations because I know their expectations are too small. Yeah. I'd like to make things a little better. I listen to your podcast. I want to make things. Well, if you want the future to be distinct from your past, then you have to have a discussion of possibility. You can't problem yourself. You engineer your way there. Manage change. There's no change. Is tomorrow a little better than yesterday? No, I want tomorrow to be of a different quality. Yeah. I want to eliminate poverty in this world. I want to create deep cooperation in the workplace. I want the people in the middle to feel they have control over their work and not worried about what their boss's boss thinks. So pick your venue. If you want it to be qualitative, then you ask yourself, what's the possibility that you are a stance for at this stage of your life? And this comes right out of the Forum and Warner Earhart. But what's and as soon as then I become that possibility. I am the possibility, let's say, of a reconciled community. Well, then every time I go into a room, guess what comes with me? The possibility of a reconciled community. What's your solution? Well, my first solution is to be a stance for that possibility, and then to ask each other, what can we do together to live into the possibilities that matter to us? And you say, well, what are you going to do about that? It's very urgent. We need immediate action. And my thought about that is, well, you've been saying it's urgent. We need immediate action for how long? Oh, I've been saying that for years. How's it going? It's just, once we get connected and get deeper, so most of the questions, what's your contribution to the problem? What's the possibility? What's the no you've been postponing? Yeah. They're really pathways to intimacy. And if you and I can really get connected, all right, and I don't mean fall in love or not, but I just mean really feel that what we're saying is to the point, then together we can create the world. The world changes the moment we do that. And I can't do that on my own.
Yeah.
I try.
I love that, well, many things there, but that idea of living into the possibility. And I think it's an interesting notion how we do introduce that excuse of, but we need to take action right now. We need the urgencies that's approached. And exactly as you point out, is that, well, we've had that sense of urgency for 20 years. What have we done with it? How's it working?
Speed, urgency, practicality are the arguments, the defenses against transformation.
It's sort of the recipe for serial improvement. but not, as you said, transformation. It keeps you
best,
optimizing the status quo.
A better cereal, yes.
Right. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how do we create some of that pathway to intimacy, as it were, because I think there are a lot of people who would like to reconnect. They want to be back in community. They want to feel that sense of belonging. And they're stuck on the notion of, where do I even turn? Where do I begin this process? And so for those that maybe are there, maybe they see a cause, maybe they see something that they would love to bring people together around, where would they start?
Well, I would say start in the gatherings that you now occupy. There are some places, if you're doing something, whether it's a staff meeting, whether it's an association, whether it's a church, whether it's a therapy group, whether it's a barbecue out back, someplace you are in contact with other people, and the notion is change the conversation and you change the world. And so wherever you are, you start saying, well, how do we connect people with each other in this setting? And you do it by questions. And if it's a work setting and you're having town meetings or staff meetings, instead of starting with an agenda and forcing people to leave with a list, you say, I want to do something different today, and you can fire me, hopefully, after I try this. But I'd like you to break into groups of 3 and say, what's the crossroads we're at in this unit in terms of doing what we came here to do? What's the crossroads you're at in your life? I start asking people questions about crossroads. As soon as you tell me and crossroads means that you have a choice in your life, and all of us have a Disney version that somehow by the time of a certain age I'll have things worked out. Well, it's not going to happen. Okay, I'm that age, and it's not going to happen. And so you start saying, what's the crossroads we're at? What choices do we have, really? And then the other key thing is, when you're with people, stop being so damn helpful. Don't be helpful. Don't ever say to anybody the rest of your life, well, when I was in your situation. That's a big lie. Mm-hmm. It pretends that it worked out. Well, I was in your situation, and look what happened to me. And so this confidence and this colonialism of knowing what's best for other people, you can just stop doing that and replace that with curiosity. Why does it matter to you? Why does that matter to you? If you want to get close to somebody, you don't have to share that much of yourself. You just have to get interested in them. And the most loving, interesting question you can ask another person is, why does that matter to you? And then when they tell you, you say, why does that matter to you? And you keep asking that until they get irritated. And then you've made a connection. And it goes deeper. We're going for depth. And it only takes 5 minutes. You can do it. We do it with strangers all the time. And I've never told my family that. I know. So, and so it's a dialogic solution. It's a conversational transformation. All transformation is linguistic. And so wherever you are, you don't have to go to a new group. It's just say, wait a second, can we just talk for a minute about what's the crossroads we're at this stage? Mm-hmm. Can we talk for a minute about whether we're doing what we came here for? Yeah. Can we talk for a minute about how 3 silent people, can you guys just say something? I'd like to know how you're taking in. So questions, open-ended, stressful, anxiety-provoking, overly personal, great questions. And so my thought is work at reshaping whatever you've chosen to be in the middle of now, and not as an evangelist, but as a person of great curiosity.
I just wanted to pause for a moment and do 2 things. First, I wanted to say thank you. So many of you have been sharing and starting your own conversations, adding reviews and ratings, and just been really a great group of listeners engaging in these conversations and moving them forward. Thank you, because that's why we do this. Secondly, for those of you that are not already getting in on the action, or for those that have started to engage but you haven't yet experienced that full access, I did want to invite you to join that. If you go over to oneideaaway.com/join, that's going to give you first access to our weekly conversations, as well as the exercises, reflections, even the online challenges that we're now rolling out. We had a member just the other day write in and tell us how a recent exercise we released helped her identify several new possibilities she didn't realize were right in front of her. It dropped her anxiety, dropped her concerns and her doubts, and she was able to create a brand new option from the ideas that were sparked. She's now completely comfortable and confident to move forward on what had been a really tough situation. That exercise, it came from inside access of the One Idea Away community, the newsletter, the private group, the ongoing interactions and practices and conversations that we share. So I hope that you're going to join in on the fun and use it to connect to the peace and the joy and the confidence and support that'll help you create and experience the life you desire. Again, just go over to oneideaaway.com/join. And I really look forward to connecting with you inside the community.
You know, it's so a few things on that, because I think one is that notion that while there may be things that we wish to move forward, and we may get to that, there is also this notion that we can start right where we are, because we're already in community, whether we recognize it or not. We are in communities. And it is beginning to, as you said, enter into the gatherings that we already occupy, and to be able to change that conversation, and to change the conversation not through the typical means of persuasion or influence that we've been taught. We're not trying to go in there and litigate going to a different direction here, but to do it simply through curious questioning. And I love that idea of, using the example of why does that matter to you? Or what about that is really important to you? Is that when we ask those types of questions, we're uncovering more and more of what's really underneath what the person is saying and what really truly does matter to them. Because most of the time, the first answer we give, the first thing that we say, it's just as you said before, that's the story playing out again. It's the routine that we already know to answer. Ask a little further, ask a little further, ask a little further, and you're going to have a very different conversation.
And you'll be less lonely. This is how you connect with people. It's not that I have to help you. I'm not here as your therapist or your coach. I'm here to get connected.
Yeah.
And the goal, a friend of mine says, the reason we have problems is to force people to work together. It's to force people to relate to each other. And so part of the shift in thinking is that relationships are the point. They're not a means to an end.
Yeah.
And these are just fast ways. In this community book, after sorting through thousands of questions, there's about 6 conversations, and not the only 6. But if you really ask somebody, what are you good at? So the gifts conversation is a huge departure, because mostly we're looking for deficiencies. We want to know what's wrong. What can we fix? And if people give up their complaints, they don't know what to replace it with. I was in a workshop once, and I sat with a guy, and I said, what's up? And he says, I can't get a date. I said, why can't you get a date? He said, I'm a mess. I said, what do you mean you're a mess? He said, my apartment's a mess. My living room's a mess. My bedroom's a mess. I'm a mess. I'm just not an organized person and alienates people. And I said, how long have you been telling that to yourself, that the reason you're not getting what you want is you're a mess? He says, for a long, long time. I said, have you ever gotten help on that? Yeah, I've been through therapy and everything. I said, I got a suggestion. We have another 4 minutes together. How about if you agree that you talk to me, but you say refer in no way to the fact that you're a messy person? He says, okay. I said, okay, let's try it. I said, you go first. He had nothing to say. I said, oh my God, if you don't talk about a mess, you have nothing to say, do you? And he said, no. And I said, God bless you. And so we're friends then. I identify with all of it. I got nothing to say either.
Yeah.
But, and so the conversation, so focusing on people's gifts. So I said, what are you good at? And then he had something to say. And so forget the deficiencies.
Yeah.
I've been thinking lately that the notion of self-improvement is an act of self-contempt. It's an act of violence. I've got to get better. You're not going to get better. You're okay. You're fine. It's the consumer culture that says you don't have enough.
Yeah.
And you're not enough. So part of it is, another one of these conversational zones is to focus on what's working. What are you good at? What's the gift you've not fully brought into the world?
Yeah.
You answer that question and you're in trouble. Because as soon as I tell you out loud, I got to do something about it. You don't have to coach me into it.
You know, that is one of the most powerful and also one of my favorite questions of along those lines of what is that gift that, you know, that you are meant to bring into this world or that you have not yet brought into this world. It is such a powerful thing. And like you said, it's just not an orientation that we have been educated or trained to be able to have to this point. I think, you know, and just for everybody, I want to dissect this a little bit. So you've mentioned two of the three elements of kind of this possibility focused community. Number one is that through those gatherings and the questions and the curiosity, we're talking about, number one, relatedness. And how do we build that relatedness? Then number two, you just talk about a focus on gifts to help people recognize what is it that you're already bringing to the table? What are these incredible talents that you uniquely have? And what can we create from that? That's the second one. And I think there's a third one that I think is really interesting because especially depending on certainly the American culture and so the other cultures, this shouldn't be a big deal, but somehow it is this third element of generosity. And so tell me a little bit more about generosity and how is this something that, you know, it's one thing for us to think of maybe being generous in the moment or maybe some specific things with people that we already like, but it's the generosity beyond that, the kindness beyond that. What do you really mean there? And how do we start to recognize how important this is for us to be able to embrace?
Well, we're all generous people. We all have kindness in it. It doesn't have to be trained. We don't need to go to empathy workshops.
Yeah.
All right. But we have to confront the fact that we have swallowed the narrative of scarcity. If I believe that I'm not enough and there is not enough in the world and I don't have enough, then being generous, forgiving, giving away what I have is going to seem like a cost to me, a risk to me. And so I would go after the shift. And what do you mean you don't have enough? You know, what's the story you have about you being not enough or too cautious or whatever? And once people realize they're living they've bought the notion of scarcity. And you know, these ideas are sold for a reason. They have a political dimension. If I believe that I don't have enough, then I can be sold something, and I can be managed in a certain way. I can be controlled. Yeah. I can be turned against my brother and my sister. And so I would say it's a conversation of abundance. I have enough. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to be generous. I'm going to, give away what I have relationally or physically because I know it produces more. Generosity reproduces itself. Mm-hmm. Forgiveness reproduces itself. But you can't do it as a moral cause because we've tried that. We've tried preaching generosity. We have Stewardship Sunday and everybody passes the hat. But that's not the point. The point is to confront people with the fact that they have been told and swallowed and believe that they're not enough, that there's something wrong with them. It's internalized oppression. That if you're told long enough that there's something wrong with you, that all you're good for is back-breaking labor, after a while you begin to think maybe they're right. And Luke, part of your program or your mindset, all right, based on 22 minutes of data, is you're trying to tell people you're not crazy, there's nothing wrong with you, and you're not alone. Yeah. And if people get that, then of course they're going to be generous. Of course their heart's going to go out to everybody around them. Yeah. And they'll learn to take in people's gifts. And that's the transformation. And I need you to do that. I need a group of people. And I probably need to be in the room to do that so that I can smell what's happening, not just hear it.
You know, you use one of those magic phrases of you're not alone. Because I think you're just spot on with A, what you're picking up on, and B, what you're saying. And that when people connect to that, when they recognize that I do belong to something. I belong to this community that's around me. I belong to this group of people. All of a sudden, there is that shift in mindedness of abundance. There is that shift in generosity. There is that shift in terms of what we begin to recognize. And I think that, kind of bringing some of this full circle, it's part of what we were talking about at the very top of the call of the amount of isolation that is out there right now. And that so much of the symptoms that we're seeing within society are a result of that isolation, because it's easy for us to, because it's easy for us to think that other people are others, that they belong somewhere else, not us.
And we build a wall. And the other thing It means that there's no such thing as someone who's poor. It just means they're economically isolated. If I call you poor, then I think I have to figure you're broken. You're not broken. You're just economically isolated, which means that I need to bring you in. I need to invite you in to some way that you can be economically productive and commercialize your gifts. So that's the work. That's the real community work. If you take the notion that some people in marginalized communities, and we have funny language for it,
Right.
is the source of violence. The economic system is the source of the violence that we see. It's not about gun control.
Right.
It's not about mental illness. It's not about a war or AK-47. It's about the fact that the economic system requires people to fail at it, to be low-cost labor, to be casualties of it. And I'm not talking about welfare or anything. I'm saying all of us need to be economically productive and have control over our economic lives. And more services, better ambulances, better health care doesn't do that. And this culture is loath to face up to the fact that the economic structure and the whole notion of scale and size and big boxes is costing us everything.
Yeah.
So a lot of my focus now is around an alternative economy, a local economy, a shared economy, constructed economy. And it's not the only thing, because everything you're talking about connection and God and spirituality has to be there also. But you have to be willing to put money, the conversation of money, in with the conversation of personal growth and development.
Yeah.
And maybe I have to decide, do I have enough or not? And most of us do.
Well, I think there's another, interesting conversation that I think is developing out there right now. And it part of this developed actually in a very different realm than focused on community. But it is that recognition, early on you said that so much of our personal growth has been focused from that inside out type of model. And that certainly is a very powerful method of individual transformation. Yet it can't deny the environment, the ecosystems that we operate within. We've got to talk about money. We need to talk about the actual environment. We need to talk about governance and politics. We need to bring those things in. They can't remain separate because it's one interconnected, interdependent, as you said, interdependent society.
It is an ecology, and it has to be local. And we're heading that way. There's a local movement. There's everything, co-housing, cooperative businesses. And so all that's happening. Part of what you can do with your voice is to make that visible. And say, there's an alternative place out there, whether it's called economy or a relationship or how we live. But it's going to be a local engagement on our part. And the world's going to force that on us because Toyota is not coming to town with 500 jobs.
Yep. Absolutely. So there's one more piece of this conversation that I wanted to introduce, and it seems like it does come back around, but it was just something too important that I did not want to leave out for everybody, is the concept that you introduce of inverting your thinking. And for everybody to just kind of shorten our way into this and then Peter, you could please expand, is that, let's use the example of that. Maybe it's that parents don't create children. Maybe it's the children that create the parents. It's not the teachers that create the students, but the students that create the teachers. It's not the leaders that create the communities, but the communities that create the leader. And so I was wondering if you could talk to this idea of inverting your thinking and how much more possibility this begins to get us to consider.
What it does, it repositions accountability. If I want to experience my freedom, I have to be willing to live with the anxiety that goes with that and the accountability that goes with that. And when I say the child raised the parent, you can argue with me, but I'm not going to argue with you. Okay, I would just say, suppose you believe that your child was creating you, where would that take you? Where would it take you? And you say, well, then the dialogue I'm having with my child is a denial of that. Suppose I inverted that. And suppose I decided that I was going to ask my child what's up and get interested in my child and get curious about my child and stop worrying about managing their future. And if that all came to me once at a bar, and the guy said, we're the Southern County Rounders. And I said, that's fine. And he said, you're the audience. And I said, oh my God, I've got a job to do. I thought I was supposed to sit here and drink and listen to you. And now you're telling me that I have to produce your performance? Thanks a lot. But I thought that's true. You know, I went to a concert once. I forget who it was. And I said, you know, the first half of the concert, he was kind of dead. And the second half, he woke up. And then somebody said, Peter, we woke up the second half of the conference, and we produced the performance. So if you believe that, you don't want to argue about it. You just want to say, if I thought that way, it will take me somewhere. Somebody complains about their boss. My question is, why are you creating your boss that way? Because if you weren't compliant, if you got connected with your peers and didn't put up with that madness, your boss will lose that quality in about a day. And so the inversion of thinking is what you pray for. That's what every time I meet somebody and they shift my thinking, oh my God, that's as good as God gets. Yeah. And as good as, and it's got to be 180 degrees. You can't say, well, that makes sense, but it's kind of what I've been saying all along. No, you haven't been saying that all along. You're saying that you've been saying it all along is why you're stuck. And it's a matter of semantics. No, it's not a matter of semantics. In the beginning was the Word. That's how God created the earth, my friend. And you can recreate the earth with your own language, and you start by just inverting where you think cause resides. Yeah. And every time you think it resides in the president, or resides in the council, or the legislature, or policy, or my boss, or my wife, or my husband, as soon as you think cause resides there, you have no power to change your life.
Yeah. It's just this. It's incredible to see what it is that opens up for us when we do begin to invert our thinking of cause and effect, how that begins to invert our language and look at things so differently. For us to be able to take a look at it, I know you talk about it in terms of citizenry and citizenship, and I look at it from the standpoint of us even being members within a community. Yeah. And, for each of us to recognize that it's the member that creates the community, not the community that creates the member, and start to take a look at, okay, so what does that mean to me? How does, what is the role that I can start to play based on that? I love the notion of, we create our boss in that sense. And how is it that we play into that? It's a fantastic notion, right? Well, and it's so important.
It is essential because what is therapy? Therapy is to help you re-remember your past in a more forgiving way, which really gets down to realize you thought your parents were difficult. Well, you weren't that easy as a child. Well, they had to be that because of you. Yep. And you say, I don't want to think that way. Yes, you do, because then that means your life is now in your own hands. And if we can agree that collectively, then life is in our hands, and we can stop whining.
So, Peter, if we bring this conversation to a head, one of the ways I would love to wrap up is just when we get into these conversations on One Idea Away. I like to offer this as a beginning point for our listeners. It's a conversation that they can continue in any number of ways on their own, within our own community, in understanding more of your work or any of our guests' work. But I like them to think about this as a beginning point, because I don't want them to just take this as insight and inspiration and then walk on to the next thing. And so let me just pose to you, what is it that you hope our listeners, our community members, will be able to carry forward from this conversation?
I hope it will catalyze them to rethink how they're interpreting what's going on around them. For the conversation to mean anything, for everybody listening, 10 other things are happening in your life. Yeah. And when something clicks, it's because these things are converging, and you're making sense of things in a way that opens up space for you. So I hope that this conversation, one, like I said, you realize there's nothing wrong with you. The world is wacko. All right. And so there's nothing wrong with you. And then if you look at what's going on in your life, whatever venue you're in, and say, is there a way of thinking about these that opens up space for me to see another future? Then that to me is, the best we can do, because you and I are, our podcast is, nothing is more pathetic than thinking podcasts going to make change. Come on. but it makes you and I, Luke, feel a little less alone and a little less crazy.
Exactly.
And you're a joy to be with.
Peter, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on One Idea Way, for sharing your work, your insights, your experience, and as well as just your energy for the possibility of what can be.
Well, thank you.
For everybody, I number one, the book that drew me to Peter's work is called Community, Sense of Belonging. I do encourage you to check that out. Again, you can check out more of Peter's work because there's a new version, actually, Community, that's coming out. Restore-commons.com is where you can find out more. With that in mind, I guess maybe I just want to bring us back to one key question that Peter brought forward for us through this whole thing is, do you want a future that is distinct from your past? Because if so, you've got to take a look at your role in it. And you've got to take a look at what is the possibility that you wish to create? What is the role that you wish to play inside the creation of living into that new future, living into that possibility? And how it is that you're going to invite others to step out of their isolation, to invite others to join in that possibility. And let's just see where it can take us. Because to me, that's a future worth figuring out. So everybody, as always, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on One Idea Way. Thanks for stopping in. And until next time, continue to enjoy the journey. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you really enjoyed it, do me a favor, let us know. You can keep the conversation going and send us a message on our Facebook page, which is simply One Idea Away. Go ahead and tag me in the post or even just direct messages. Also, I would be incredibly grateful if you could share this episode along with someone that you believe could benefit from hearing the ideas and the messages that we got into. That's pretty much why we do this. So you can just go ahead and share it from your app or email it along, whatever works for you. The point is to share, to talk, to discuss, and keep the dialogue going, because it's in those conversations that ideas can take hold and create profound shifts in perspective. That's what allows us to live life more fully, deeply, and consciously. As always, we would love to see you post a review for the podcast in iTunes or whichever app you're using. And until next time, remember, you're never more than one idea away from a whole new reality. This is Luke Iorio and One Idea Away, signing off.